Hi everybody, welcome to a brand new lecture of the Ankit Faria Certified Ethical Hacker Program. Up until now in this course we have discussed a wide variety of different topics, everything from Trojans, cross-site scripting, to DOS attacks, then phishing attacks, backtrack, your social engineering toolkit, reverse shell attacks, bind shell attacks, backdooring of files, and just about everything else that we had initially started out in this particular course to learn. Now, one particular topic that is still kind of pending from this particular course is something known as SQL injection. So today I'd like to actually cover that topic. Today I'd like to talk a little bit about what exactly is SQL injection and how you can actually detect whether a remote computer has SQL injection or not, and how you can actually execute SQL injection. Now, SQL injection is a very, very interesting yet at the same time very simple type of attack. Anybody who has some basic knowledge of SQL can actually perform SQL injection. Even if you do not have any basic knowledge of SQL, you can actually still easily perform SQL injection. So in today's lecture, I'll go ahead and start by covering some basic knowledge about SQL, and then I'll discuss the theory behind some of the most commonly found SQL injection attacks, and then I'll give you a live example as well of an actual website that is vulnerable to SQL injection. To safeguard the security of the website, I'll obviously not hack into the website live, because I don't want all of you to also start hacking into that website, but I will be showing you screenshots step by step of exactly what I had done to actually hack into that particular website. So it's going to be an exciting lecture. So without wasting time, let's go ahead and start with the SQL injection lecture. So what exactly is SQL injection? Where can you use it? What kind of attacks you can execute using it? What kind of systems you can break into using it, and so on. Now, to be able to understand all of this, we need to start at the very basic level. So let's go ahead and start with some important terminologies and definitions that all of us need to understand to be able to perform SQL injection. First of all, what exactly is a database? A database is basically a collection of data that is stored on a system. A table is usually a set of related data values that are organized and stored in the form of columns and rows. So essentially, I think all of us know what a database is. A database is just, a place where you store some important data, and typically in a database you'll have multiple tables. Right? There could be, say, for example, in your college database, there could be a table on, say, admission data. There could be a table on marks. There could be a table on, say, placement data, and so on. So each database typically contains multiple tables, and inside each table you have a collection of rows and columns that are organized together. Now, SQL stands for Structured Query Language. It's a query language that allows users to send queries and instructions to the database to retrieve data from it. So essentially, most companies will have a backend database where they store some important data. And each database has multiple tables generally, and every table has a collection of rows and columns, which I think is pretty obvious. Now, if you want to interact with the data stored in a database, you need to use SQL. So SQL is a programming language, or not a programming language, but a query language that allows a user to interact with some data that is stored in a database. Now, SQL injection is the misuse of SQL commands to access some confidential information stored in a table or a database that you're normally not supposed to be able to access. So that is what SQL injection is all about. The use of SQL commands to do things with a database that you're normally not supposed to be able to do. is what SQL injection is all about. So let's start with the introduction of SQL injection. SQL injection attacks are attacks in which the attacker uses specially crafted SQL queries to carry out malicious activities on the victim computer. SQL injection does not exploit or misuse any loophole in a web application or database. It actually exists due to a lack of validation of input by a web application when a database query is made on the internet by a user. So I like to actually spend a little bit time on explaining this point. See, up until now, all the different attacks that we've been learning about in this particular course, all of them depend on some security loophole in a software or a hardware or operating system or some daemon or a firewall running on the victim's computer. But in SQL injection, you're not dependent on a security loophole. It is more, you're basically more dependent on poor programming being used by some application that you're running on your website. Maybe you're not doing any validation. Maybe you're not checking the input that you're accepting from the user. Maybe just processing the input without validating it, and as a result, you're giving an opportunity to the attacker to be able to misuse or do some malicious activity on the database that you have. The best part, from a criminal's perspective obviously, about SQL injection attacks is the fact that, like most other input validation attacks, they can easily be executed simply with the help of a browser. So for SQL injection attacks, you don't require any software. I mean, you could use a software if you want, and later today I'll show you some software as well. But technically speaking, you don't really need a software. You can perform SQL injection from within your browser itself. So let's go ahead and start by discussing what all you can actually do using SQL injection. Like, what are the different types of attacks that are possible? First of all, you can use SQL injection attacks to gain illegal or unauthorized access to the victim's database. Second is, you can illegally view confidential data that you're normally not supposed to be able to view. You can then modify that confidential data. You can even delete confidential data from the victim's database. SQL injection can also be used to bypass login prompts. So imagine that there is a website that is displaying a login prompt. What if you want to bypass it? You could potentially do it using SQL injection. Of course, the assumption here is that the victim is running SQL injection or is running SQL. Finally, you can also execute some malicious code on the victim's computer all remotely through the internet with the help of SQL injection. So let us actually go ahead and start by discussing some basics of the SQL query language. So if you have no experience with SQL, if you have never used SQL before, I'll share with you some basic commands that you must know. Only then you can perform SQL injection. So if all of you look at the screen, there is a database or a table, whatever you want to call it. The name of the database is college, right? Or you can call it, the name of the table is college. And this table has 4 columns. You have name, age, city, and year. And it has 5 rows. So Ankit, Rahul, Rohan, Varun, and Amit. These are 5 rows of information stored across 4 columns in this table or database called college. Right? So essentially it has the name, age, city, and year of all the students that are studying in that particular college. So if we wanted to interact with this database or table, if you wanted to retrieve some information from it, if you wanted to insert some information, delete some information, how do we do that? With the help of SQL commands. So the first command that I wanted to share with all of you or tell all of you about is the select command. The select command allows you to retrieve some data from a database. So the typical format of the select command is the following. Select column name from table name. So essentially it will return all the rows or all the data stored in a particular column whose name you have specified from the table whose name again you have specified. You could also write select star from table name. So that will actually retrieve all the data in all the columns of the table whose table name you have specified. For example, select name comma age from the table college. Now that command, what it does is it basically opens up the database or table called college, and in that table it will look for two columns, the name column and the age column. It will then retrieve all the data from both the name and the age columns and return it as output to the user. So that is what the select name comma age from column command does. There's another command which is select star from college. What that command does is it returns all the rows and all the columns from the table college. Now it is also possible to add conditions to the select commands. So say for example, the next example that is there in this slide says select name comma age from college where city is equal to Mumbai. So essentially what it does is this command will search in every row of the column city, it will look for Mumbai. And any row which has the word Mumbai in the city column, that row's name and age columns will be returned as output. Similarly, you can add two conditions to the same select statement as well. So select star from college where city is equal to Mumbai and year is equal to 1985 is a classic example where essentially this command will search the city column and look for Mumbai. So all the entries which have Mumbai in the city column will be returned, but then it also searches for the searches in the year column and looks for 1985 in any of those entries where the city is also Mumbai. And once that happens, then the entire row with all the columns get returned because we are using select star. Then you also have something called select top command. What the select top command does is it returns the top entries from a particular database or table. So the command select top 3 star from college will actually return the top 3 entries or the top 3 rows from the database or table called college. Irrespective of what the top 3 entries are, they will be returned as output. So that was the select command. The next command that I wanted to share with all of you is the insert command. So the select command allows you to retrieve some data or search for some data from the database. The insert command allows you to add new data to the database. And the command is insert into followed by the name of the database. So in this case it is college. Followed by in brackets you specify the column names whose data values you want to add. So there are 3 column names. You have name, age and city. Name, age and city. And then you type values, and again in brackets you can actually specify the text or the values that you want to add to the name, age and city column. So under name column you want to add Ankit, then age, and then city is Mumbai. So that's the insert into command that adds rows to an existing database. The next command is the update command. The update command allows you to edit existing data from a remote database. So the typical syntax is update college, that is the table name or the database name. Set age is equal to 27 city is equal to Delhi, where name is equal to Ankit. So essentially the update command will search the database college and search the column called name and look for Ankit in any of the entries. And the moment it finds Ankit, it will change the age to 27 and change the city to Delhi. And finally you have the delete command. The delete command, like the name suggests, allows you to delete data, existing data, from a remote database. So the command that you got to type is delete from, followed by the database name. So in this case it is college, where name is equal to Ankit. Right? And then you can also write something like delete star from college. So that will delete all the rows, all the columns from the database college. The previous command, delete from college where name is equal to Ankit, that will basically only search for Ankit in the name column, and then once that row is found, it will delete that row from the database college. So typically these SQL commands are sent from the user to the database, either using the get method or the post method. If you remember, we had learnt about get versus post methods earlier in this particular course. In the get method, what happens is essentially the query string, which could be SQL commands, get transferred within the URL itself from the user's computer to the remote computer. And get methods are generally not secure. It gets stored in the history and it can easily be sniffed using a data sniffer, as we had seen in the earlier lecture. It should ideally only be used for retrieving data like database searches, which is SQL searches. Post methods generally is much more secure because in the post method, the query strings, which in this case are SQL commands, are transferred within the body of the HTTP request. And they are much more secure than get method. So imagine that you're a criminal and you want to actually use SQL injection to hack into a victim's computer. So what do you look for? How do you find out whether a remote computer is vulnerable to SQL injection or not? So first of all, typically you need to find those pages that have a form in them. So any page that has a form which allows you to input data, or the form that accepts some input from you, potentially those could be pages that could be vulnerable to SQL injection. Because within those form fields, you can actually type SQL commands and click on submit. And if they have not implemented proper validation of input provided by the user, the SQL commands that you type instead of filling up the form properly, those SQL commands reach the backend database of the victim, and then the SQL injection gets executed. The second thing that you got to look for are dynamic web pages like ASP, PHP, CGI, and JSP pages. And once you have found a vulnerable SQL injection page, the obvious question that comes to mind is, where do you need to enter the SQL injection code? First of all, you can enter it in the URL address bar. So right at the top. Why? Why can you enter the SQL commands in URL address bar? Because the SQL commands sometimes get transmitted to the backend server using the get method. And the get method uses the URL itself. So in the URL address bar of your browser, you could potentially type some SQL commands and perform SQL injection on a victim. Or you can actually just type the SQL commands within the input fields of a form that has been displayed on your screen by a particular website. One quick test, it doesn't always work, it's not a 100% accurate test, but it's something that you can try to do. If you try typing a single quote at the end of the URL address that you have typed in your browser, or in the input box of a particular form in your browser screen, and if you see an error message, something like what has been displayed right now on the screen, then chances are that that particular web page may actually be vulnerable to SQL injection. This is not a guaranteed 100% accurate test, but it is something that you can definitely try out. Alright, so we kind of know what SQL commands are all about. We kind of know what all we can do using SQL injection, but we still don't know how to do it. So it's time to actually start discussing the various types of commonly found SQL injection codes or commands that you can type to actually execute this SQL injection attack. And the first kind of attack that I want to share with all of you is something known as always true SQL query attack.